The polished mahogany coffin seemed to mock the grief-stricken faces gathered in the chapel. Vera clutched a crumpled tissue, her gaze fixed on the man she had loved, the man who had left her nothing but a mountain of debt and a hollow promise. He was gone, and with him their future. As the service ended, a cold rain began to fall, mirroring the icy dread that had settled in her stomach. A man in a sharp black suit approached her, his face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Vera, I'm Mr. Alastair Finch. I was your husband's attorney." He left some final instructions. They met in his office, a room filled with the scent of old paper and dust. Finch cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "Your husband's will. It's quite straightforward, really." He read through a list of minor bequests, a watch to his brother, a car to his nephew. And then he got to her. "To my wife, Vera. I leave everything in the hope that she can find a way to pay off the debts I have accrued over the years." Vera's world crumbled. He hadn't just left her with nothing. He had buried her under the weight of his failures. A sob escaped her lips, hot and sharp. Finch, seemingly unfazed, reached for a second envelope. "I thought I would be forgotten," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then the lawyer pulled out a second envelope, this one sealed with a flourish of red wax. He held it up, a peculiar glint in his eye. He left this for a specific person. A secret person, he called them. The air in the grand, high-ceilinged library was thick with an unspoken tension. Vera sat across from Alastair Finch, the second envelope resting between them like a dormant snake. The news of her inheritance, or lack thereof, had already spread, and the vultures were circling. First came her husband's brother, Robert, a man whose perpetual smirk was only outmatched by his expensive suits. He had always seen her husband as a rival. "It's a shame about the money, Vera," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Of course, your husband always was a bit careless with his finances. I'll be happy to help you with the estate. For a small fee, of course." He saw her not as family, but as a stepping stone to the wealth he believed he was owed. Then there was her husband's sister, Eleanor. She swept into the room, a cloud of expensive perfume and sharp judgment. Eleanor had always been her husband's favorite, showered with gifts and praise while Vera was left to manage the household on a shoestring budget. "He left you with nothing? How very like him," she sneered, her eyes raking over Vera's modest dress. "He always did have a strange sense of humor. He told me he was leaving me something special, a little something to remember him by. I always knew he loved me best." Eleanor's entitlement was a fortress, built on years of favoritism and a belief that she was the true heir to the family's legacy. Their greed was a palpable force, a suffocating blanket that threatened to smother the last remnants of her dignity. Vera, who had worked tirelessly to support her husband's lavish lifestyle, had always been an outsider. The family saw her as a commoner, a gold digger who had somehow managed to ensnare their brilliant son. They had never accepted her, and now, in their moment of perceived victory, they made no effort to hide their contempt. She had spent years in their shadow, a quiet presence in their grand parties, a silent witness to their extravagant whims. While they vacationed in exotic locales and purchased luxury cars, she had mended torn clothes and stretched meager budgets to make ends meet. Her humble life was a stark contrast to their world of inherited privilege and effortless wealth. She had always known they resented her, but she had never anticipated the full force of their malice. The lawyer cleared his throat, a sharp sound that cut through the silence. "The second envelope is addressed to the person who can identify the true value of my client's most treasured possession." A low murmur of confusion rippled through the room. Robert leaned forward, a frown creasing his brow. "Most treasured possession? The antique watch? The first edition book?" he muttered. Eleanor scoffed. "It has to be the painting." He said it was priceless. Their greed had blinded them. They could only see value in things that could be sold, in things that had a price tag. They saw her husband's life as a collection of assets, a puzzle to be solved for their own gain. They had no idea what truly mattered to him, what he had secretly held dear. The lawyer's words hung in the air, a silent challenge. Vera looked from Robert's avaricious eyes to Eleanor's cold, calculating gaze. She had nothing to lose. They had already taken everything from her. But as she watched them bicker over material possessions, a new emotion stirred within her. A quiet resolve. They were so focused on what they could take, they had failed to see what she had already been given. A secret. And in that moment, she realized her husband hadn't left her with nothing at all. He had left her with a fighting chance. The chapel was a mausoleum of fake sympathy and quiet animosity. As Vera walked down the aisle, the stairs felt like physical blows. The whispers were a constant, low hum, a current of judgment that followed her every step. Poor Vera, she heard one cousin murmur, a woman who had never spoken to her before. Left with all his debt. He was a fool to marry her. Another relative, a distant aunt, gave her a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're so brave, dear. I don't know how you do it." She knew what they were really thinking. They were calculating, in their minds, how the absence of her husband's wealth would impact their own lives. They had all been waiting for this day, not to mourn a man, but to claim what they believed was theirs. The will reading was the main event, the grand finale they had been anticipating for years. The family's history was a tangled web of old money and deep-seated resentments. Her husband's grandparents, she had learned, were notoriously eccentric. They had hidden their wealth, distributing it in fragmented, confusing ways, leaving a trail of clues that had been the subject of family lore for generations. The tales of their secret estate, a fortune rumored to be hidden somewhere on their expansive property, were a constant source of tension. It was a ghost story they all believed, a tantalizing promise of untold riches that had fueled the family's greed for decades. Now, as the lawyer prepared to read the will, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The rustle of paper, the clearing of a throat, seemed to echo in the vast, silent room. Vera sat in the front row, a silent observer in a drama that had been unfolding long before she arrived. The family's eyes were fixed on the lawyer, their faces a mix of hopeful avarice and barely concealed impatience. "As you all know," the lawyer began, his voice a somber drone, "my client was a man of many passions. He instructed me to read this will in the presence of all of you, his family. His first bequest is to his brother, Robert." Robert straightened in his chair, a smug look on his face. The lawyer droned on, listing a valuable antique watch and a first-edition book. Robert's smile faltered, replaced by a scowl. It was far less than he had expected. Next was Eleanor. She received a painting she had always coveted. A collective sigh of disappointment rippled through the room. The grand bequests they had all been expecting were not there. And then, the lawyer looked directly at Vera. "And to his wife Vera, he leaves everything." A collective gasp filled the room, followed by a chorus of outraged whispers. "Everything? But what about the debt?" "Ah," the lawyer said, a flicker of a smile on his lips. "That brings us to the second envelope. This letter, addressed to Vera, contains a final instruction. The true value of his treasured possession, as he called it, is not in any monetary asset. It is in something he knew only one person would understand." He handed Vera the second envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the red wax seal cracking under her touch. Inside, there was no list of assets, no grand declaration. Instead, there was a single cryptic note. And in that moment, Vera realized the game had only just begun. The tension in the library was a living, breathing thing. Alistair Finch, the lawyer, stood before the family, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He held the first envelope, the one Vera had already seen. "As you know," he began, his voice a calm counterpoint to the storm brewing in the room, "my client's primary will leaves all his assets to his wife, Vera." A collective gasp, followed by a torrent of outrage, erupted. "This is an outrage," Robert bellowed, his face a mask of purple fury. "The will we saw, it said he left everything to us. You've forged this." "This is some kind of sick joke," Eleanor spat, her manicured hand flying to her chest. "He would never have done this to us. He loved me best. He promised me the world." Vera sat silently, the second envelope still in her hand. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a play unfold. The family's greed was so profound, their sense of entitlement so absolute, they couldn't even comprehend the simple truth of the words. They were so accustomed to getting what they wanted, to being the center of her husband's world, that the idea of him leaving them nothing was a betrayal on a cosmic scale. "I can assure you," Finch said, his voice unyielding, "this is the only valid will. Your brother, he left you what he believed you deserved. Nothing more, nothing less." Robert lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. "You're a liar. You've been bought off. This gold digging which manipulated him. She's always been a nothing. She's an outsider." Eleanor shrieked, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "She was never a part of this family. She doesn't deserve a single thing. I deserve it. We deserve it." The words, sharp and venomous, pierced the strange calm Vera had wrapped herself in. Undeserving. A nothing. An outsider. This was the true nature of their grief. Not for the man who had died, but for the fortune they had lost. They were willing to tear her down, to call her every name under the sun, because they couldn't bear the thought of her, the quiet, humble woman they had always looked down on, inheriting what they believed was rightfully theirs. In that moment, she realized her husband's final act wasn't just a will. It was a carefully planned reveal. He knew they would react this way. He had seen their greed, their selfishness, their years of subtle cruelty, and he had orchestrated this final, public humiliation. He wasn't just leaving them with nothing. He was showing them who they really were. Finch held up his hand, silencing the chaos. "As I said, this will leave everything to his wife, Vera. The debt he accrued, he arranged for it to be paid from the sale of his other assets. The car, the watch, the books, it all goes towards settling those accounts. The one thing that remains, the one thing he didn't sell, is the most valuable of all. And the instructions for it are in the second envelope." The family's outrage was now mixed with a sudden, desperate curiosity. What could be so valuable that it was spared? What secret was hidden in that second envelope? Their eyes, now filled with a new kind of avarice, were fixed on Vera. The will had been read, the truth had been revealed, but the final act of this betrayal, this inheritance, was still to come. The library, once a scene of explosive fury, had now become a cold, calculating war room. The family, defeated but not broken, had shifted from emotional outbursts to strategic scheming. Vera, still holding the second envelope, was the new target of their united malice. "You can't do this, Vera," Robert said, his voice now a low, menacing hiss. "We have grounds for a lawsuit. Mental incapacitation, undue influence, will tie this up in court for years. You'll spend every penny you don't even have on legal fees until you're forced to give in." Eleanor, her tears dried, now looked at Vera with a steely, venomous gaze. "Think about your reputation. Our family is prominent. We'll make sure everyone knows what kind of a person you really are. A calculating, heartless thief who manipulated a dying man." The emotional blackmail was a new weapon in their arsenal, a subtle poison designed to isolate her, to make her feel like an outcast. The room was filled with a chorus of similar threats. A cousin, usually quiet and timid, chimed in with, "We know what you did. We'll find a way to expose you." The atmosphere was thick with intimidation, a concerted effort to break her spirit before she even had a chance to understand what her husband had left her. Vera felt a primal fear rising in her throat. She had always been a peacekeeper, a woman who avoided confrontation. Now she was surrounded by a family of wolves, and she had just been thrown a bone they all wanted. They were no longer just angry, they were dangerous. She felt unsafe, trapped in a house that was no longer a home but a hostile fortress. Amidst the chaos, a familiar face approached her. It was her husband's cousin, Jonathan, a man she had always considered a friend. He was a quiet, bookish man who had always treated her with kindness, often pulling her aside at family gatherings to share a joke or a story. He had a gentle smile and empathetic eyes. She felt a wave of relief wash over her. She finally had an ally. He leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. "Vera, you have to be careful. They're all talking about what to do next. I heard something about checking the law firm's records, finding a way to declare the will invalid. She clung to his words, a lifeline in a sea of hostility. "Thank you, Jonathan," she whispered back. "I knew I could trust you." He patted her hand, his smile a mask of practiced sympathy. "Of course. Anything for you, Vera." But as he turned away, a subtle shift in his expression didn't go unnoticed. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, were cold and calculating, fixed not on her, but on the second envelope clutched in her hand. Later, she overheard him on the phone, his voice a low murmur. "I told her to be careful," he said. "I've got her trust. I'll get her to tell me what's in it. She's so naive, she'll never see it coming." The betrayal was a physical shock, a cold jolt to her system. The one person she had trusted, the one person who had shown her kindness, was just another snake in the grass. The realization was more painful than all the accusations combined. She was truly alone, and now she knew she had to play their game. She had to use their own greed against them. Because what was in that envelope wasn't just a secret, it was her only weapon. The betrayal by Jonathan was the turning point. Vera's fear gave way to a cold, calculated fury. She had spent a lifetime being underestimated, and now she would use that to her advantage. She would play the naive victim, but beneath the surface, she was gathering her weapons. She went back to the lawyer, Mr. Finch, not with fear in her eyes, but with a quiet resolve. "They're plotting against me," she said, her voice steady. "They're threatening me with lawsuits, blackmail, and now I believe they are trying to gain my trust to get what they want." Finch listened, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. He had been a lawyer for a long time. He knew a real fight when he saw one. "I have already taken precautions, Mrs. Vera. Your husband anticipated this. He arranged for a separate legal team to handle any challenges to the will. They are experts in estate litigation, and they are already on standby." His words were a shield, but Vera knew she needed more than legal protection. She needed to expose them, to turn their own greed against them. She began to act. She left the second envelope in plain sight on her coffee table, knowing Jonathan's phone calls would have alerted the family. She set up a hidden camera, a small, inconspicuous device her husband had left behind, a curious tool he had always used for his projects. The family, growing desperate, took the bait. They saw the open door, the unguarded envelope, the seemingly helpless woman. One night, Robert and Eleanor, emboldened by their desperation, crept into the house. They were clumsy, their movements driven by a frantic avarice. They ransacked the living room, their eyes fixed on the coffee table. The camera recorded it all. Their frantic search, their whispered accusations, their ugly greed laid bare. Jonathan, meanwhile, tried a more subtle approach. He called Vera, his voice dripping with false concern. "Vera, you're not safe. I think you should come stay with me. It's for your own protection. You can even bring the envelope with you." Vera's response was simple. "That's very kind of you, Jonathan. But I've already called the police. I've reported a possible break-in. They're on their way." The look on his face, a mixture of shock and panic, was more satisfying than any revenge. He knew he had been caught. The final act came the next morning. With Mr. Finch by her side, Vera called a family meeting. The family, still reeling from the events of the night before, looked pale and agitated. Vera didn't say a word. She simply played the video from the hidden camera. The silence in the room was deafening as the family watched themselves. Their break-in, their insults, their desperate search for a fortune that wasn't there. When the video ended, she looked at them, not with anger, but with a quiet, devastating calm. "I am not a victim," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You have all accused me of being a thief, a liar, a manipulator. But you are the ones who tried to steal from a dead man, who broke into his house, who plotted against his wife. You said I was undeserving, but your own actions have proven just how deserving you are of nothing at all." Their expressions, once filled with rage and entitlement, were now a mix of shame and disbelief. She had flipped the script. They had been so focused on her supposed weakness that they had never seen her strength. They had been so convinced of their own righteousness that they had failed to see their own corruption. Her husband's final gift was not just a fortune, but a lesson. And she had just taught them all. The silence in the room was a heavy, suffocating thing. The family, their faces pale with shock and shame, stared at the blank television screen as if it were an oracle of their impending doom. Robert and Eleanor, the architects of the break-in, were the first to face the consequences. A knock at the door, sharp and authoritative, announced the arrival of the police. Vera watched, a silent witness, as the officers read them their rights, their voices a crisp, professional drone. The family's outrage and sense of entitlement evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of handcuffs and a police car. Alistair Finch, the lawyer, stepped forward, a final, lethal blow to their grand schemes. "Per my client's instructions," he said, his voice as cold as a tombstone, "any family member found to have acted maliciously against the estate or his wife will be legally barred from inheriting any part of it. This includes any potential bequests from the second envelope." The looks on their faces were a mixture of disbelief and utter despair. Their greed had not only cost them their dignity, but their last hope of a fortune. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and hushed phone calls. The family was cut off, their attempts to contact Vera met with silence. They had spent years building a kingdom of lies, and now it was crumbling. The whispers that had once followed her were now aimed at them, tales of their avarice and humiliation spreading through their social circle like wildfire. In the quiet aftermath, Vera found herself reflecting on the last few months. She had been betrayed by the people who were supposed to be family, yet she had found an unlikely ally in the most unexpected of places. Her husband's old friend, an artist named Daniel, had been a quiet presence throughout it all. While the others plotted and schemed, he had simply offered to help her pack her things, to sit with her in silence, to share a cup of tea. He had never asked about the will, never mentioned the money, never tried to gain her trust. He had just been there. The contrast between his quiet kindness and the family's brutal betrayal was a painful but necessary lesson. Her husband's final act wasn't just about justice. It was about revealing who truly stood by her. The second envelope, it turned out, wasn't about a hidden fortune at all. It was a note, and a key to a humble workshop her husband had kept secret from everyone. It contained not money, but a lifetime of his creative work, his true passion. He hadn't been a businessman, he had been an artist, an inventor, a visionary. The fortune he had supposedly lost had never existed. He had simply been living a quiet life, creating his art, while the family was obsessed with a non-existent inheritance. The greatest gift he left her was the truth. He had exposed the rot in his family's soul, and in doing so, he had given her the freedom to live her own life, free from their toxic influence. She was no longer a victim, she was the architect of her own future. The echoes of the family's collapse faded, replaced by a profound and lasting silence. Sarah's life, once defined by their judgment and demands, was now her own. She sold her husband's art, each piece a testament to his hidden passion and quiet genius. It wasn't a vast fortune, but it was enough to pay off every debt and build a new life, one free from the weight of his family's expectations. The true inheritance, she realized, was not in the money she gained, but in the people she lost. The family, consumed by their own greed, had destroyed themselves. They had spent a lifetime chasing a phantom fortune, a dream of wealth that had blinded them to the simple human connections that mattered most. Their loyalty was a currency, their love a transaction, and in the end, they were left bankrupt of both. Sarah found a different kind of wealth. The quiet companionship of Daniel, the newfound freedom to pursue her own passions, and the profound peace of a life no longer entangled in a web of deceit. She understood now that true riches were not measured in dollars or bequests, but in integrity and trust. Her husband's final act was not about revenge. It was a devastatingly clear lesson in who was truly worth keeping in her life. He didn't just expose their greed, he freed her from it. And as for the question of what to do with the family, the answer was simple. She had given them a chance to show their true colors, and they had failed. They had not been victims of circumstance, but of their own choices. She had no desire to share her hard-won peace with people who had so eagerly plotted her downfall. Their consequences were their own to bear. The story serves as a powerful reminder that some of the greatest betrayals come from those closest to us. It forces us to ask, what would you have done in her place? Would you have cut them off completely, or given them a second chance? Is there a price you would put on peace and justice?